it's so natural for a person to retort to anger. And so that's exactly where she goes. And it's there, it's always been there. It's what's drived her throughout everything. Here comes that familiar feeling of anger, and she doesn't do anything to choke that. She lives in it.
I guess I didn't see particularly that Danny would just firebomb the city.
And welcome back to the creative burnout of David Benioff and D.B. Weiss. Now, last time we gave a brief introduction and talked about probably the most commonly accepted complaint of Game of Thrones Season 8, which was the poor pacing and the episode count. But then I ended by postulating that perhaps there was a bigger issue at play rather than just the shortened time that David Benioff and D.B. Weiss gave to the show, but rather something that stemmed even further, going way past bad writing, although I guess it would be considered a byproduct of it. What made Game of Thrones universally loved from both critics and audience alike, other than its witty and eloquent dialogue,
Does that mind of yours you keep going on about?
Well, I've never actually been able to kill people with it.
Good thing. I'd be out of a job.
it was the memorable and lovable characters, whether you love them or love to hate them. While some shows had the illusion of status quo change and danger for the main characters, what made George R.R. Martin's books and the show so special was that it followed through on that sense of unease and danger for everyone involved.
So it irritates me when I'm watching a movie or reading a book and the hero is going through incredible dangers, him and his 6 buddies, and none of them die. You know, maybe one of them gets wounded at some point, but they all survive pretty much untouched at the end.
Main characters died. Certain players were thrust into new situations. Characters went through arcs that spanned years and seasons, and everyone is expendable at any given time. But they never broke character. Other than the pacing and the White Walkers not amounting to much, another complaint is how the characters don't feel consistent with how they originally started out as. Which, to be fair, I find it's the wrong point that people are upset about. As I mentioned before, on paper, where the characters end up makes a whole lot of sense. Dany getting power hungry and losing her way, Cersei going out crying, and Tyrion not having any power plays, it all makes sense. The problem, again, is that the overall pacing of the episodes as well as the shorter episode count ruin something that makes or breaks Game of Thrones. Character continuity. People are quick to bring up screen continuity for things that are innocuous, like Starbucks cups or water bottles, or when one actor stands in one place but then the next cut they're somewhere else entirely. I think there's a YouTube channel that specializes in that, but I'm not exactly sure. But character continuity is just as important, if not more so, because while on-screen continuity can distract, character continuity can literally break art. If a character does not have a consistent arc that leads them from point A to point B, they can end up feeling like another character entirely.
Atticus made God knows how many kids want to become lawyers. So when racist Atticus came hot off the presses and Go Set a Watchman, some peeps started losing their goddamn minds, saying Atticus was ruined and Harper Lee's legacy was dead.
Let's talk about an example of character continuity being broken. Queenie from Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. In the first film, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, Queenie is seen as a sunflower of a woman. She reads people's minds, is very quirky, kind-hearted to everyone around her, and is smarter than she lets on. By the end of the film, she forges a real connection with one of the main characters and decides to pursue something with them because damn the rules. In the second film, because they wanted her to side with the bad guy at the end, she ends up having this out-of-nowhere character weakness where she doesn't like people calling her crazy, even though she's doing stuff that is totally against her character. How so? She basically brainwashes a guy into following her to a different country in order to marry him, and allows herself to be swayed by a magical Hitler because she believes that he'll make it so her and her boyfriend could get married, despite the fact that he's been seen murdering regular people and, she can read minds. That's a more extreme example of it, but the point still stands. There needs to be reason behind a character suddenly switching motivations. This is a clear example of point A to point C with no B in between. Now, with Game of Thrones, what we know about the characters as is, we gotta ask ourselves honestly, does it make sense that it ends the way it does? For my money, it does, but through horrible character continuity and pacing, it tarnishes that. Let's look at 3 big examples from this season. 1 good, 1 bad, and 1 ugly, because I like to give credit where it's due. Let's talk about Grey Worm's arc, Dany's arc, and Jaime's arc. Grey Worm goes through so much this season. As shown from last season, he has finally found something to lose, and we see how his love for Missandei really affected him in the battle. During the long night, he's scared out of his mind. There's something very pure about how we actually believe for a second that he's not going to make it out alive because of how we know he's acted before in battle. Hell, the seeds have been there since Season 7 when he looks at the Golden Company raid on Casterly Rock. When Missandei is captured, the fear and anger in his voice and face is beautiful to watch. We've never seen this machine of war actually scared for something he loves. When he turns into a stone-cold murderer again after we see Missandei will never be the head of communications for Dany, it's natural for him to go back to what he knows best. This is an example of consistent character continuity this season. And why it works so well, most of the scenes between Grey Worm and Missandei would have probably been spaced out in the episodes too. So while you get them all together, it feels a lot more natural compared to the other seasons where you probably get at most 1 scene between them every 3 episodes. Meanwhile, Dany has been screwed over so much with the pacing because the beats for her character continuity is natural, but the progression isn't. To understand why, you literally gotta see what brought her to this point. We established that she's someone who not only wants to be in charge, but also wants to be loved by the people. Now, a large part of this is in Emilia Clarke's natural screen presence, but she's effortlessly charismatic. Even when she's cold to people, it's within reason. Her brother sold her to this fucking ox of a man, would always belittle and abuse her, and threatened her. So of course she's gonna look at him with the 1,000-yard stare. When it comes to Red from Guava Island, of course she makes him die in the worst possible way. He aided in kidnapping her children and basically catfished her with his non-existent bank account. He wasted her time and got her army at that time killed for no reason at all. She kills slave masters and tyrants, but it's all in the service of the people that were just that. Horrible people. When she sees that she's becoming exactly what she hated, she actually gets a huge humility bomb and tries to deal with the fallout of her horrible decisions. When she finds herself back in the same position she was in at the start of the series, she uses her newfound knowledge to turn the pendulum back onto the abusive Dothraki leaders. When she comes back, she intentionally goes after the people who are hurting her town and gets the people back on her side. When she kills the Tarleys, which, while excessive, does make sense, it was because she needed to set an example to the people, but still tried to help everyone. Then in Season 8, it's as if all her negotiation skills just got sucked out. She makes no attempt to gain Sansa's favor at all, and can't even speak from the heart, which she could do with no worries. When she meets with Sansa, it's like she suddenly doesn't know how to compromise, which we've seen before. In Season 5, after killing someone people really liked, but did it because they caused a lot of problems for her, she tried to get back on everyone's good graces by bringing back these slave battles in an arena.
If he really believes I'm going to reopen the fighting pits...
You should reopen the fighting pits.
She hated every second of it, but she still tried to play ball in the name of democracy. So when Sansa asks this,
what happens afterwards? We defeat the dead. We destroy Cersei. What happens then?
I half expected her to say, look, Jon loves you, and I love Jon. I'll do anything to keep people happy, and I don't intend to step on any toes when I become Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. You'll have the North, but I'll still be the leader at the end, and I'll work with you. But instead, she pulls her hand back and looks scared. This is a literal non-issue, especially when you consider the real priorities at hand for both of them. And after the battle, when everyone is praising Jon a little too much, she gets upset due to the fact that no one is praising her, when moments earlier, she was getting nothing but praise for making Gendry ruler of Storm's End and making him a true Baratheon. When she learns about Jon's identity, she immediately gets scared about him overthrowing her without even talking to him and gauging his feelings about it. Not only is this completely out of nowhere for Dany, because she always makes sure to talk to everybody to understand their emotional state, but she's usually a great judge of character, and this little crack should have revealed itself a bit more elegantly. But then, when she reveals she'll never earn everyone's love in Westeros,
I don't have love here.
that is a load of horseshit. Up until then, she was loved by everyone, because she made an effort. Because of how fast the season goes, all we get to see of her attempts to befriend the North is by butting heads with Sansa, bumping uglies with Jon, and that's it. She doesn't try to talk to the common folk, which she always tried to do, except for maybe Sam, but that turned sour really fast, and I don't even think it counts. What makes people so adverse about her going insane is because that up until this point, we've seen her care for innocents and children, but we haven't seen the turn it would take for her to power through innocence without flinching. What did we get? Missandei and her dragon dying? Maybe, but if so, is that why it happened so fast? When she turns evil at the bells, that was the biggest 180-degree turn, but yet, I thought it could have been done more differently. Before the episode starts, there's a recap for what happened prior. And in the moment, when Missandei gets a little bit more off the top than she expected, this happens.
He has the better claim to the throne.
Every time a Targaryen is born, the gods flip a
The
coin.
Mad King gave his enemies the justice he thought they deserved.
Children are not their fathers.
Be a dragon.
You have a gentle heart.
Targaryen, alone in the world, is a terrible thing.
You don't want to wake the dragon, do you?
With this, I thought they were going to do the same thing here. I thought that was at least the creator's way of introducing something that Dany had been fearing up until that point. Imagine, if you would, where the bells are ringing, but all she can hear in her head are the people she's lost, or the words of the people who wouldn't accept her, or maybe even just the words that she said, and she's slowly starting to believe it. And it just culminates with, just because it would make sense since Dany's actually heard it, Olenna Tyrell saying,
"The lords of Westeros are sheep. Are you a sheep? No. You're a dragon. Be a dragon."
Almost as if the bells fade away, like how noises fade away in Breaking Bad. But they didn't. And yet, above all else, that makes sense in the long run. But what doesn't make sense is Jaime Lannister. Believe it or not, this is not because of the fact that he dies with Cersei. I think upon reflection, this is the best place for his character to end. But what gets to me is this line right here.
If not for yourself, if not for her, then for every one of the million people in that city, innocent or otherwise.
To be honest, I never really cared much for them. Innocent or otherwise.
You do care for one innocent. I know you do. And so does Cersei.
This man started out as a sister-fucking, child-pushing, two-handed fighting asshole, but then over the course of the entire series, we see that there's layers to his douchebaggery, culminating in him losing his hand, the thing that literally defined him, and having a very intimate moment with Brienne where he ultimately reveals why he got the title of Kingslayer.
Once again, I came to the king, begging him to surrender. He told me to bring him my father's head. Then he turned to his pyromancer. Burn them all, he said. Burn them in their homes, burn them in their beds. Tell me if your precious Renly commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, and children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then? First, I killed the pyromancer, and then, when the king turned to flee, I drove my sword into his back. I slit his throat to make sure that didn't happen. That's where Ned Stark found me.
If this is true, why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you tell Lord Stark?
Stark? You think the Honorable Ned Stark wanted to hear my side? He judged me guilty the moment he set eyes on me.
It's a profound, beautiful moment. And since that moment, he tries to be a better person. Proves he's a better person. He's got compassion in his heart for the people that are his enemies, and more importantly, he realizes that the woman he's loved his whole life is about to let millions of innocents die because of her pride, her toxicity, which reminds him inherently of why he did what he did to begin with. He journeys far to the place where he was once captured and crippled, knowing full well what would await him when he arrived at the doorstep of the place where he did objectively the worst thing he had ever done, and decides to fight for the living, and intimately connects with someone who has seen the real him, only at the end of everything to be drawn back to his cruel nature, to be drawn back into the arms of the one person who brought out the worst in him, but for better or worse, was a part of him. He could try to change, but in the words of one of the greatest villains of all time,
we can't always fight nature, John.
That's beautiful when you think about it. But all that tragedy is thrown away because he
never really cared much for them, innocent or otherwise.
That one line ruins his whole character continuity because the writers willed it to, because it was probably a funny line. Now, this might just be nitpicking. Maybe he's just putting on a front. Maybe he's just trying to seem fearless in front of Tyrion. But he doesn't need to. They've been more than intimate with each other with what their true feelings are about issues. Yet, one defense I've heard people levy this way is that Jaime knew how to play to Brienne's sympathies with that scene, and that he was basically just manipulating her to get him to King's Landing. Hello, and welcome to Watch Mojo, where we count down the top 3 things that are wrong with that explanation. Number 1, she was already going to take him there anyway, so why manipulate that further? Number 2, that means Jaime is a better actor than anyone ever gave him credit for, because that's some good improv if that's the case. Number 3, even if that were true, which I doubt, that ruins Jaime's character arc for the remaining 4.5 seasons, because if he were playing Brienne that hard, that means every subsequent development involving him was insincere and his character's journey meant nothing. I hope you understand at this point that these are serious problems. While some characters are done in the same way, like Arya and Jon, these 3 show the best and worst examples of this. While Grey Worm's journey is more consistent and Dany's is consistent but on the rocks, Jaime's is undone by one line. And as much as the whole can make a difference, Sometimes it's the little things that matter the most, especially in a show about character interaction. But is that all the show's known for? It is true that while Game of Thrones is renowned for how tightly written the characters are and how expertly interwoven multiple storylines can be, the main reason anyone loves anything fantasy related, I don't care if you're an academic scholar who did an entire 90-page thesis on Tolkien, or the most casual fan who watched Game of Thrones because their friends forced them into it, everyone ultimately comes together for the spectacle of it all.
Dracarys.
And does Season 8 have spectacle?
Oh my god.
Stab! 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 Stab!
No!
Why are you running? Why are you running? War!
I'm gonna stab you in the fucking face!
I'm ghost riding the whip. Crazy taxi.
This season has to be, without a doubt, the best looking and the best produced season in all 9 years of its run. I haven't seen cinematography and battles as sweeping and beautiful and epic as this season on TV ever. And it's all thanks to the incredibly talented cast and crew involved. But in a way, that's probably one of the most crippling things about it. What were the big moments that viewers were glued to? The death of Ned Stark, the Battle of Blackwater Bay, the reigns of Castamere, the Watchers of the Wall, Hardhome, the Battle of the Bastards, the Wagon Raid, North of the Wall. These were huge moments, but in between those moments were multiple episodes of people just talking, fighting more verbally and intellectually, and swords were a last-minute necessity. Hell, one of the big moments I just mentioned wasn't even a huge battle or an earth-shattering event. It was just dinner. Unlike TV shows like the ones on the CW or at times even Netflix, by not having these huge battles or jaw-dropping moments in every single episode, it made those events have this sense of dread because people will die at the drop of a hat when they're just talking to each other. But what happens when they get in a huge battle? Stakes are automatically raised, and we, the audience, are more scared for what will happen to our favorite characters. All of that is thrown out the window when we start Season 8. Because of the short episode count, we reached a point where with this season, expectation was so high for big developments to happen and for so many characters to die that they basically needed to give into convention of fantasy in each episode by having a big moment. As such, we have one episode of build-up and a dragon ride that's beautiful but pointless, an episode of people talking and interacting with each other, one huge battle sequence, another episode that's half of people talking and half a huge climax, one episode that is one huge set piece, and one episode that presumably will be half spectacle and half resolution. But as a result, those bigger episodes didn't resonate. The Long Night, which was hyped up so much by being shot over the course of 55 night shoots and presumably being the longest battle sequence since the Battle of Helm's Deep in Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. And yet, The Long Night left many lukewarm with the lack of fatalities. The last 30 minutes of the Starks happened so fast, it made emotional moments not hit as hard as they could have. And The Bells was basically 9/11 with dragons, and all anyone could think through it is, why are you doing this? Again, it's not so much that all of these things happen, but without all the buildup, everything just feels like loud noise. And what makes this all incredibly heartbreaking is that even though there's a lot of love and care put into these big moments, none of it works. And it's not just because of the pacing or the episode count. Let's look at The Long Night, for example. Now, at the time, I got a lot of flack for saying this with my friends, but I feel it's safe for me to say it's probably one of the weaker episodes in Game of Thrones. But not because people didn't die. I would argue that because the episode had this overwhelming sense of dread and failure, it gave the exact same tone and execution as if everyone were dying. But what really doesn't work is that at its core, it feels empty. There's 2 episodes that are just like it, Blackwater and The Watchers of the Wall. All 3 of these episodes take place during a battle, and 2 of them are pretty much non-stop action. But in Blackwater and Watchers of the Wall, not only do they have this tone where everyone feels scared, there's multiple story threads going on. Blackwater has Tyrion and Bronn trying to hold the front. Joffrey needs to make the decision to stay and fight or run and hide. Sansa and Cersei are being forced to stay away from everything and confront how useless they are at the end of it. And even the Hound wants nothing to do with the battle at the end of it by seeing how violent and horrific it gets because it makes him confront his biggest fear. There's something for everyone to latch onto because there's a story going on everywhere, before, during, and after the battle. Even the Watchers of the Wall, there's Jon trying to defend the wall, and everyone inside. There's Ygritte wanting revenge but not really wanting to kill Jon. There's Sam trying to keep his cool, and Gilly learning of the cowardice inside the ranks of the Night's Watch. On top of that, there are entire episodes that are dedicated to preparation of these battles. One episode of Season 2 involved Tyrion coming up with the idea of using wildfire in the Battle of Blackwater, and with Season 4, Jon really tried to prepare for the battle prior, and everything feels so desperate because they really started preparing at the last minute. Hell, even if we're judging the episodes past Season 4, the Battle of the Bastards is not just a masterclass on how to cinematically direct and film an action scene. There's clear stakes going on at the start of the episode. Rickon Stark and all of Winterfell are at stake, as well as Jon being horribly outnumbered. They're barely able to formulate some modicum of a plan, and even then they barely get out on top. With the Long Night, not only do we not get a clear plan of what is going to happen, we also only get 1 episode of the characters taking stock of everything. No, scratch that. We barely get 3 minutes of everyone coming up with something, and it's so incredibly vague.
Dragonfire will stop him?
I don't know. No one's ever tried.
And even though it's last minute, none of the events make it feel like they came up with it at the last minute. And as much as I applaud D&D for not doing that much dialogue in The Long Night, we barely get a chance to attach ourselves emotionally because A, the one time we do have a scene with people talking about what's happening, it's in the middle of the episode and it's the same things they've been talking about prior to this point.
Without the Dragon Queen, there'd be no problem at all. We'd all be dead already.
And B, I can't see a fucking thing. I've had to avoid editing clips up to this point because this is the only way I can edit this episode. Which again, The Watchers of the Wall was done at night, and it had infinitely better lighting than this. There's only a battle, but no sub-stories we can attach to, except for Arya and maybe Grey Worm, but again, that comes later on in the episode, and when it happens, it slows the pacing to a crawl, which while this sequence with Arya is amazing, that should have been something more near the beginning, or like I suggested before, maybe its own episode entirely. Now believe me, I'm actually alright with Arya killing the Night King, but I feel why everyone was more upset isn't because she did the act, but rather you don't get any build-up to it from her perspective. Imagine seeing the Night King and having to see Arya go full-on Solid Snake on him in front of a huge crowd of people like this. That would be pulse-pounding, as any wrong move she makes would make her instantly dead. But it's not just the Long Night. It's also in other moments in the series, like the first episode. As cool as the scene where Jon and Dany are riding the dragons together, in the grand scheme of things, you could cut out the scene entirely and start it with them already at the waterfall, and everything moving forward wouldn't change in the slightest. I mean, I'm all for them doing more to expand Jon and Dany's relationship, but this moment, again, due to how short the episodes are, feels like the show is dragging its feet rather than moving the story forward, especially given how every minute counts this season. Or even The Last of the Starks. Most of that episode is people talking, and then suddenly they cram in the spectacle in the last 20 or so minutes because they're worried we were getting bored. And even then, it doesn't make a lick of sense. In a show as immaculately detailed as this, there is no excuse for short-sightedness. How did Danny not see all of those ships? Why didn't Danny just try to burn them all? But none of this is compared to the bells. This actually starts off on the right track, with a nice bit of tension with everything, and the few moments where the dragons and the suspense are used, it's put in perfect execution. But then it loses its way when Danny just wipes out the Golden Company ships almost instantaneously, when in just the episode prior, their arrows were seen as a huge threat. This time, it's almost as if she activated the star in Mario and just seems to be impervious to the hits. There's no fear in whether or not she'll get killed, unlike the prior episode, which lowers the stakes. I think you see where I'm going with this. If Drogon had gotten hit during the second go-around at King's Landing by at least one of the arrows, that'd be endearing. We'd be scared of her getting killed. But as is, there's nothing to make us think she's not just gonna clean house. And on top of that, when we get to the actual sacking of King's Landing, the overall destruction is spectacular, but the little side stories make absolutely no sense. Jaime and Euron having one last go at the shore of King's Landing feels like an excuse to make people scared for Jaime, when in all honesty, Euron should have died back on the boat. Shit, that's what I thought happened. Then there's Clegane Bowl, which, while it looks stunning, this moment did not have any reason to happen at all. A part of Sandor's arc is to be able to move on from violence, but being able to move past it by finding purpose. As much as he hated his brother, he never wanted to be like him, consumed with violence. If they were to have him fight his brother, it should have been in service to protect someone he loves, like Arya. Even the location makes no sense. While it may be pleasing to the eye to see them fight on this Soul Calibur combat arena, nothing about the stairs fits both characters. If it had happened, say, in the same arena that Oberyn was killed by the mountain, this would be more fitting, as if to show the theme that no one can escape death, which was shown with Beric dying back in the Long Night, finally getting killed for the last time. But of all the characters in this episode that I feel have been dealt the worst hand because of the abundance of spectacle, I think it's Arya that suffers the most. She is no stranger to surviving insurmountable points where she should have died a long time ago, but she doesn't because of the fact that it's really badass what we're seeing right now. One of the most infamous examples is in Season 6 when Arya gets stabbed repeatedly in the gut, and yet she's able to run around doing acrobatics and shit like she's Nathan Drake. And when she realizes the path that she would have followed if she had blindly accepted vengeance as her main purpose of life, it probably would have been more poetic if she had died unceremoniously, like it seemed like they were hinting at during the bells. I mean, that's honestly what I thought they were gonna do. She has spent the entirety of the series in such a narrow-minded mindset in that she lives for vengeance. She lives for revenge, especially in a series where we have learned that vengeance and revenge will always lead you down a terrible path. And only when she's finally ready to turn her life around and live, she's punished for it because of all her past mistakes. When I saw this scene in The Bells, I actually thought it was David Benioff and D.B. Weiss following through on punishing Arya. I thought that this was basically a very symbolic way of killing her off. She rises up from the ground, covered in ash. She is surrounded in hellfire, and yet a lone white wolf comes from the ashes and carries her away into the light. I thought that would have been the perfect way for Arya to go out. But then I saw the preview for the series finale. You might be thinking that this is all a whole bunch of nitpicking, but I feel the writing is in the reception. Because while all of these huge moments have been exceptionally entertaining to watch, it speaks volumes that the best received episode from both critics and fans alike was episode 2, where everyone is preparing for the long night and lines are clearly drawn. But all of this is just dancing around the bigger issue, because while we can certainly attribute Season 8's failure to the poor pacing and episode count, or inconsistent character continuity for the main cast, or even a priority of spectacle over substance, there is a bigger issue at play here when it comes to Game of Thrones' final season. One that this series is named after. And that is the fact that the creative burnout of David Benioff and D.B. Weiss effectively killed Game of Thrones' final season. What do I mean by this? Well,
all our times have come. Here, but now they're gone.
it's about a month late, but hey, at least it wasn't as bad of a delay as the first part. I want to give a quick shout out to Alex Mazurik, Happy Editing, and OGVH, who helped me out with that editing emergency involving the character continuity. You guys came up with some really great examples, and links to their channels will be in the description below. I am so sorry for the delay. Again, it wasn't nearly as bad, but the bright side of everything going on right now, I've been a lot more productive with this. So please stay safe, stay indoors. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I'm going to have more content for you guys very soon. See you guys later for the finale.